So I don't know about you, but if you've been reading this, I feel like each chapter just gets better and better. So chapter 2 in this book, Under Pressure, she really gets into girls at home. And this one is a little bit more parent oriented and goes into some practical ways that you can be helping her. But really, one of the things I love is when she talks about avoidance. So avoidance feeds anxiety. I teach that to every client that I work with that has anxiety. That if you've got avoidance behaviors going on, then it's an indicator that you have anxiety going on. So we start to avoid things that make us nervous. We start to avoid things that worry us. And one of the problems becomes if you let her do that all the time, that behavior starts to reinforce that I need to be afraid of this, therefore I need to avoid it. And the more she avoids it, the more she thinks it, the more she feels it, and then she avoids it, and we get this loop going. I feel like Dr. Damore does a really good job and gives some really great examples with some of her clients in how she deals with that avoidance cycle and helping girls really get through that. On page 37, she starts covering meltdowns. I don't know about you, but I hear about meltdowns in my office all the time. And it's one thing when you have a 3-year-old meltdown, but when you have a 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old meltdown, it's usually a whole nother ballgame. And it's embarrassing for her. It's painful for you. It's overwhelming and frustrating. And it's simply because she does not know how to handle the discomfort of her emotions. And especially with anxiety, it just causes panic and it causes this fight or flight response. And so you may see a meltdown happen when we've got some anxiety happening. So I love on page 37, she really goes into how to help manage those meltdowns. One of the things she said is most parents find when they try to help their daughter at the height of her discomfort, right? She's in the midst of being overwhelmed and she's freaking out and she's having a meltdown and you're coming in trying to help her. That she considers every single one of your excellent ideas to be useless and rejects them all. I will tell you from working with girls with anxiety for the last 12 years, that is 100% what happens. And I guarantee that's mostly what's happening in your home. If she's at a level 10 and you're coming in at level 10 with her and you're offering suggestions, not going to help you. We need to get her down to like a 4 before any of that is going to be helpful. So she's going to reject it all immediately. Just know that. So if that's a tactic that you or your husband is using, I'm going to encourage you, throw it out the window. We're going to come up with some other ideas because that just doesn't work. It's not effective. I love the quote, she's letting you know how helpless she feels by making you feel every bit as helpless, right? I love that quote because I've had mom after mom after mom every year say to me, I don't know what to do. I am overwhelmed and stressed when she's having these meltdowns and I can't help her. I have no idea what to do. So just know that when she's in that helpless state, she's sucking you into it. And that's kind of the goal, is not on purpose, but she is ultimately wanting you to feel as helpless as she is currently feeling. And we got to give them props. They do a pretty good job of doing that, in my opinion. Then a little bit further down, she talks about this is what happens when we feel angry and decide to pick a fight. And this is what happens when a girl who is at the end of her rope engages loving adults in a way that quickly brings them to the end of their ropes. So she's at the end of her ropes and you in a loving, because that's the position that you're taking. It's not like you're trying to harm her, but in a loving place, she is rejecting it completely and she is just melting down and taking everything down the hole with her, if you've ever been in that situation. So any attempts to give advice, cajole, help, any of that, not going to be helpful. It just rarely works. So what I have found and what Dr. Demore has found is really moving into that validation. I'm not going to cover this deep in here, but I will tell you, if you look at the Essentials, it's a course that's offered through Raising Teen Girls. There is a module in there on communication. I teach all of validation. I teach exactly what it is in detail. It's not an easy thing, but it's a skill that every parent, I believe, should learn. It'll help in all your relationships, not just parenting your daughter, but it's a critical skill. And she goes into it a little bit in terms of why validation is important, why the brain that is developing, also talk about that in the Essentials. She goes into just a little bit of the brain development piece and why she just doesn't have the emotional control that you want her to have, and how you can help her learn that emotional control. I love this quote, page 41. It does not matter that a girl's feelings are at these times overblown or irrational. They are very real to her and to any loving parent in her present. And I love that quote because so often I hear parents who are so frustrated and overwhelmed by their daughter's anxiety. And yes, we know that it is overblown and irrational, but to come at her and telling her that in those moments, it's like pouring gasoline on the fire. She's not going to fully understand that. She might the next day, but in the moment, it's just not going to happen. So I'm just going to encourage you. That's an invalidating statement to come at her in that way, because it feels very, very real to her. So it may be stupid to you and may be something that you think is not a big deal. It's very real to her, and we just don't want to treat her in that way. I know it's going to sound like we're walking on eggshells and that we're holding her hands, but we have to go back to the developmental truth that she is still a child developing. She's not an adult. We can't treat her like a 7-year-old, but you can't treat her like a 40-year-old either. She is growing and her brain is developing. So she does not have some of the skills that we often as adults expect her to have. These are things that are being learned during this time. And it is a royal pain in the booty. I get it. I watch it. I see it in my office. I hear moms screaming about it. And it's not easy, but it is part of the job of raising her, is getting her through these moments. I promise it gets better, but how you handle it is going to make all the difference in the world. We don't want to be dismissive in those times and just, again, act like it's no big deal. You want to validate that what she's going through is difficult for her and it's going to be helpful. So another quote on page 46, getting anyone to accept an unwanted situation isn't easy, but when we can tolerate our daughter's emotional discomfort, we help them to withstand the painful circumstance. And so I would say you learning to tolerate that emotion is one of the best things you'll ever do for her. And I know it's hard. I know it's asking a lot. Again, I tolerate strong emotions from them a lot of times in my office. And it's hard when they're in a lot of pain. You either want to rescue or pull, versus learning how to be strong and stable, be that kind of pillar for her, is really, really important. But I will also tell you that when you can lean into that compassion and you can teach her and tell her that you are accepting of that emotion, it will bring it down so that then she can deal with it. Girls tell me all the time, I don't know why I acted out the way that I do. It just happened. And you know what? They're not lying when they say that. It does sometimes just happen. It just comes out for a host of reasons. They're getting triggered by school. They're getting triggered by friends. They're getting triggered by family members. They're getting triggered by you. They're getting triggered by their themselves and what's going on in their head. And so sometimes they just explode with this anxiety, and I know that it doesn't make sense, but it's part of what happens. Sorry about that. This is a big one. And this is, I learned this as a therapist, right? So girls would come into my office and they would say this stuff all the time. And I would be sitting there thinking, okay, how are we going to solve this problem? I'm jumping in the boat. We're going to figure it out. We're going to do this together. And maybe we'd figure it out in the session or maybe not. And I'd know, all right, next week I'm going to see her. We'll pick it back up and we'll talk about it. Well, next week comes, I've been thinking all week about, okay, she had that issue with that friend. I wonder about this. I wonder about this. Let me make sure I ask her about this. And I'm doing all this work. And then she sits down and I bring it up and she's like, oh, I don't even remember what you're talking about. Oh, that got resolved. No. Now I'm dealing with this. I learned real quick. You do not need to give every single thing that's going on the attention. And it's going to cause a lot of friction in your home if, like, let's say you and her have tension in the morning before school and there's all this anxiety happening and then she goes off to school. She's distracted. She's got other things going on and you've had all day to sit and worry about it. And then she comes home and you want to deal with it and she's forgotten or she's moved past it. This is very common and I will tell you this is a skill you're going to have to learn to let it go. It may never get resolved and that's okay. You got to roll with her and where she's at. If she wants to continue the conversation about it, great. If it comes up again, you can refer back to it. You can approach it in a different way, but just know, and Dr. Damore says on page 53, it usually turns out that the parent worried all day about a problem and the girl hardly remembers or at least has no interest in addressing it by the time she gets home. 100% true. Then, I love this. I've never heard of this. I will be using this with clients. You can take this with you. Love this. She says that her friend was having this issue, and so she gave her daughter a notebook. And she said, I want you to write down anything that you would be texting me during the day. Because y'all's moms know your daughters are texting you all day long at school about every little thing that happens, and that's stressing you out and causing anxiety. So what she did is she said, write it down in the notebook, and at the end of the day, go back through the notebook, and whatever is really still bothering you and important, let's talk about it. And if it's not, let's not worry about it. This way, she stops texting you all the time, and your stress levels are going to go down. And then she also figures out, I actually worked through a lot more stuff. And I didn't have to go to mom for every little thing because we don't want her coming to you for every little thing. She's got to develop resiliency. She's got to get some emotional strength and emotional intelligence and learn how to handle some of the crap that's going on in this world. So love the notebook example. I think that one is so practical. Finally, a section in here. I could talk about this all day long. Actually, you know what? I'm going to do a separate little video on this because I think it's so important. So bear with me. The next video coming up, we're going to jump into this.